and welcome to Sprite, the official podcast of SpreadingLight.com. My name is Tim Yorty, and with me, as always, is the founder of Spreading Light, Michael Stein.
Hello, everyone.
Well, Mike, it was nice to see you and your wife at the Pennsylvania Farm Show a couple days ago.
We had a lot of fun, and it was brief, but I was glad we were able to get together.
I think it's probably the first time since the beginning of summer that we've seen each other.
But yeah, sometime around Easter, might have been after Easter, we were up to see you.
We haven't talked about this yet on the podcast, but Mike lives in Maryland and I live in Pennsylvania, and we are able to make this podcast through the magic of the internet and hopefully create a seamless listening experience for all of you.
Woo! We should mention that we've had all kinds of technical problems this week trying to record.
Not the least of which was me being locked out of my house for 7 hours yesterday.
Yeah, aside from that being a wonderful story, also just a touch frustrating.
I did get to do a lot of things I don't normally do, though. I took myself out to eat. I went to the mall, and then I went to watch The Hobbit. I actually watched it in 3D because the regular showing wasn't playing when I was at the theater, and that was actually pretty neat. I don't normally like 3D movies, but there was actually a scene where something flew at the screen. I don't want to say what it was, but it actually made me flinch a little bit, and It kind of surprised me even to get that level of reaction out of me from the movie.
Well, that is pretty neat then. Yeah, I've only seen one movie in 3D, and that was The Avengers, and that was partly just because I am so far behind the times I had never watched a movie in 3D.
And that was actually the only other movie that I've seen in 3D, and I didn't really care for that at all, so I was really apprehensive about spending the money to watch The Hobbit in 3D, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Well, I know they actually recorded it at twice the normal frame rate, so that might have been the difference.
That could be. So, what is our topic today, Mike?
The topic of today is empowering leadership. We are starting a series on 8 different topics from, it's a book called Natural Church Development, and it discusses 8 areas that the church should focus on if they want to see growth. And what they found is they've done studies of, well, there's over 10,000 churches about 10 years ago when I read the book, so it's probably twice that, if not more. But they've studied these churches and found where the churches are high in these 8 areas, they are almost universally growing. So it should only make sense that you want to focus on these areas to help your church grow.
And what can you tell us about our first topic?
The first area we're discussing today is empowering leadership.
And what does it mean to empower leaders?
Now, when we think of leadership, probably all kinds of different things come to mind. It is possible to be a good leader or even a great leader, but not an empowering leader. Empowering leaders are people who don't do all the work on their own. They help others help them, basically. We kind of sometimes use the phrase, help me help you. Well, that's really what an empowering leader does.
You know, before you said all that, I totally misunderstood today's topic. I thought we were talking about empowering leaders, like giving leaders the freedom to be powerful.
After all that great information I sent you.
Which I clearly did not read.
You did not read your production notes.
No, see, I'm like the color commentary. I'm the guy that asked the questions, so it's good that I didn't read it, because now I can,
of course,
ask you questions. I'm just gonna stop. So, what can leaders do to empower their congregation?
Well, I think one of the first things that leaders need to do is to realize that they can't do everything, nor should they. Too often, leaders, they will try to do everything, and sometimes it's micromanaging. That's their personality. They feel the need to be in control of everything. But sometimes it is a fear of trusting other people with doing things. And that's something that leaders really need to learn to just kind of let go of.
And, obviously in a lot of local churches, small churches, the entire church staff, the paid staff, is just one person, is that head pastor. So how does this scale? How does this scale to like churches that maybe have a large paid staff where people already have defined roles in the church of what they are responsible for, or even larger denominations that have, hundreds of churches where there's a church governing body that passes down decisions to the church. Is this idea scalable of empowering leaders, and how does that relate to various sizes of churches?
Oh, it really is. It's something that we can't say is one size fits all, but it is scalable. If you are at a church that has multiple staff, well, there's already some of this going on. Because if you're an associate pastor, you already have to report to the senior pastor, and hopefully he is giving you duties within your area of ministry, and you are performing those duties. But as far as a small church, and even though we hear about all the big churches, the vast majority of churches are small churches with only a senior pastor as a staff. When it comes to that, the pastor still needs to be able to find people that they can work with. And really, a lot of it comes down to, in my opinion, the pastor needs to realize that their church cannot be all things to all people. They cannot run 30 different ministries in a church of 100 people. Not only will he burn himself out, the congregation will get burnt out.
And my personal experience with churches is that there are sometimes situations where pastors try to take on too much and try to do everything. And sometimes I think maybe there's a little bit of pride in that. But then there's also situations where I've seen where the church board maybe tries to take on too much, maybe tries to control too much because they don't necessarily trust the pastor with the level of leadership
Right.
that the pastor desires. What happens when there's a power struggle like that between different leaders in the church? Does the pastor ultimately have the higher authority because of their position?
As a pastor, I would like to say yes, but obviously that's going to come from my perspective, and board may not see it that way. I can't say that the pastor's authority necessarily trumps the board, particularly depending on your own structure. I would like to say, well, you should trust your pastor. Your pastor has probably gone to school, had some kind of training in this area, whereas board members usually don't have training to be board members.
Could the board also have a calling to be where they are, though?
I believe the board members can have a calling, and certainly you should have members of your board who have a gift of leadership in some way or other.
At least, hopefully, some wisdom.
Yeah, definitely some sort of wisdom, and you want to surround yourself with all kinds of people with all kinds of skills, but they are not necessarily all going to be the ones that are on your board. Well, we were talking about conflict and ultimately who should kind of be in charge, whether it's the pastor or whether it's the board. And I'm reminded of a story from John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And I'm not crazy about the title, and I don't treat John Maxwell as the writer of scripture, but this one was a pretty good one. He talks about a man that he had on his board, and I don't remember the guy's name, but pretty much he quickly realized that everybody on the board looked to this one man, and if he gave his approval, everybody else was going to go along with it.
Interesting. So how did he handle that?
Well, ultimately, what happened was he realized if this guy didn't agree with his ideas, it wasn't going to fly. So Friday before the board meetings, he would go over to this guy's house. He was a farmer. He would help him with some of the chores and just talk about what was coming up on the board meeting. And he would say, well, I'm thinking about this. And when he came to the board meeting then, he never even had to present his idea. This fellow would present the idea and not trying to take credit for it necessarily, but he would present it as a good idea, and the pastor never had to do anything further to push the idea. It would just fly through then.
I feel like we could take this discussion in a direction of talking about church leadership and, ideas of how church leadership should be set up, quote unquote, And here in America, and I'm sure some other places in the world too, churches a lot of times feel like they're set up like a business. We have our pastor who is like the CEO, so to speak. We have our board. We have business meetings. We have mortgages and building plans and expansions and all these kind of things. And and I'm not sure I necessarily see that set up in Scripture.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of our podcasts will be on structure, so we can discuss this more later on. But certainly there is at least a discussion to be had regarding whether the whole board and corporate mentality is the best one, or even if it's at all scriptural.
I mean, obviously, in other places of the world, there's places where people don't have any freedom to worship publicly, so they're not set up like a business like a lot of American churches. It's it's in hiding, it's in homes, everything's quiet and hidden. The Bibles are hidden, so obviously it doesn't have to be set up the way that America has it set up in a lot of instances in order to thrive.
Obviously, and I mean, yeah, you're not going to have board meetings in those places. We do see some sort of, we do see some sort of structure of meetings even in the Book of Acts, that the disciples got together and they had to make decisions, but
somehow
it wasn't a CEO board type of meeting.
I feel sometimes with business meetings that involve the whole congregation, you have some players in the church sometimes that they want to feel like they're involved in the business decisions. There's a certain amount of wanting to be feel a sense of self-importance and have their voice heard in that setting.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I was a part of a community group, and I won't name them because I'm not picking on them or anything, but every meeting it seemed like we would discuss, well, this is what we're spending, this is the money that we have coming in, and what can we do to get more money. And it wasn't like they're keeping the money for themselves, they were giving it to other charitable groups, but it all became about money. And we would have half-hour discussions on who should mow the grass at their park and how they can save money on the gas used to mow the grass at the park.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that it's some of it's just they want to feel like they have power.
Yeah, and I think that sort of relates back to our core topic today of empowering leaders. There's going to be some people in the church that they seek out those positions of empowerment in the church for reasons that aren't entirely wholesome sometimes. Just want their own name to be recognized, maybe. And it's going to be up to the pastor to have the wisdom and discernment to kind of weed those people out and maybe send them in a different direction than what they're seeking, if it's not necessarily the best thing for them spiritually.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that does come down to the wisdom of the pastor, that he has to know, where do I take a step back and say, you know what, this doesn't always have to be about me. Maybe I can do this a touch better than this congregation member can do it. They can only do it 90% as well, but they want to do it and they have an ability to do it. I will let them run with it. And then maybe sometimes the pastor will say, this guy really, this isn't where he needs to be. And maybe it's somebody with no discipline that wants to work with the children. You know that they're going to be another kid.
Right.
And you have to say, we need to find another area for you. And that's going to tie in with the next podcast, that we're going to look at gift-based ministry. And that is a large part of being an empowering leader, is getting people plugged into the right areas in ministry.
It's funny, as much as I just sounded kind of critical of the business aspect of modern church, retail management, which is where I work, what we talk a lot about as leaders is when to step out and when to step into a situation, because there are times that there might be things I enjoy doing in the store more so than maybe some aspects of my direct responsibilities, but I can't do those things all the time because then my own responsibilities aren't being taken care of. And there are people that are there for those things that if I'm doing them, I'm not allowing them to do them, they aren't growing in their own positions.
Yeah.
So, pastors need to know when to step back and let people take on some of those aspects of leadership. And the question, one of the things we talk about in management is a succession plan. Who's coming after you? Who's coming next? Should you leave for any reason? Who would step into your role? And some of the congregation, they might not necessarily become the lead pastor or anything like that, but there's different aspects of a pastor's job that if the pastor would become ill or leave for any reason, if the flock hasn't been trained up to do some of those things, that there's going to be a real void in the congregation. I think that's a real responsibility of the pastor to take care of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. That people need to have room to grow, and it really does come down to allowing them even the opportunity to fail. I think of a parenting idea that you don't do everything for your children. You have to sometimes let them fail on their own,
Yeah.
because if they never learn how to fail, they will never learn how to pick themselves up.
Yeah, that couldn't be any more true of my kids. Our son, he wants us to do everything for him without even trying, and we have to, we have to take that step back and kind of force him to do it himself, to learn to be able to function on his own. Where our daughter's the exact opposite. She'll try and try and try before finally giving up and asking for help if it's something she can't do.
One thing that I found in the church is I don't even have a problem leaving certain areas unfilled. My congregation takes care of the cleaning of the church. We don't hire anybody at this point. We did in the past, but I pretty much decided I have no problem. I am capable of running a vacuum cleaner. I am not above that. I don't consider that to be. I don't consider myself to be too good to run a vacuum cleaner. But I've decided, I have other things that are my responsibility that nobody else can do. So I've decided that if nobody else cleans the church, I'm not going to clean the church. And it can get dirty, and until somebody else decides that it's dirty enough to warrant cleaning, I will just let it continue to get dirty. And I'm not saying that I've let the church get absolutely filthy, but it's just kind of an idea of I have to train the church that the pastor's job is not to do everything in the church. And sometimes in some churches there is that mindset that, oh, that's what we pay the pastor for. Of course he should be doing this. And that's just not the truth. The best illustration of what I'm talking about is found in Acts. I believe it's Acts chapter 5. The disciples, the church is really starting to hum along. It's probably a couple years after Peter first preached on Pentecost. And a problem comes up where they say the widows are not being taken care of. It's kind of they've been running a food pantry essentially. And the disciples say that we shouldn't take our time out to wait on tables, is the phrase that's used, and it sounds like a very derogatory term, but basically they just are saying we can't take our time to run the food pantry. Our calling is to preach the Word of God. Nobody else can do this. So what they do is they choose 7 men from their group that are capable men that are given the task of running the food pantry. And 2 of the people that are named are guys that we know the names of, Philip and Stephen. Stephen is the first martyr of the early church. But they're the ones that are given this task. The disciples never say, we're too good for this. They simply say, we only have 24 hours a day. And God has called us to preach. Nobody else can do the job that we are doing. So let's find capable people to do this other task.
That's a really interesting application of that passage. I don't think I've ever quite heard it explained in those terms.
It's something that I've tried to instill within the churches that I've been at, and it has nothing to do with, oh, the pastor is lazy, he doesn't want to do this extra work. It is, I know my first gift is teaching and preaching the gospel. That's where I need to focus my ability, because if I don't do it, nobody else is capable of doing it that has my education, my experience. Nobody else can step in for me. Whereas if I don't clean the church, well, there's plenty of capable people that can run a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, that's true. I do face that in my line of work as well. There might be tasks that I enjoy doing, but I have my own specific responsibilities that I have to do that no one else is capable of doing. But at the same time, I won't ask my staff to do something that I won't do. That's an aspect of how I've always managed, in all the various stores that I've worked for at different levels of management. But I can't be doing those things all the time. Just because I'm willing to do them and I will pitch in and do the dirty jobs, I can't do them all the time, because then no one's doing my job.
And perhaps not in retail management are you going to find people that are just begging to take out the garbage. But in the church, you will actually find people that are gifted in serving in those kind of behind-the-scenes ways. You probably will remember somebody in your youth group, I won't name the name, but somebody that had trouble focusing at times, but absolutely had a gift for service. If you needed chairs set up for an event, he would be the first one there working to set up chairs, and you think, who wants to set up chairs? That was his gift.
I know exactly who you're talking about, and that really couldn't be more true. I know, others of us that were there, we didn't really see that need. We weren't really focused on that, but yeah, he was there. He was doing it without complaint, with a smile on his face.
And that is one thing that is great about the church. I believe that God gives all the gifts that are needed to operate the church. And sometimes our biggest problem is we just aren't observant enough to find them.
I agree completely. Any other thoughts on today's subject?
No, like I said, we're going to talk about, I can't think of the name right now. It's a gift-oriented ministry or something like that. And that's going to tie in more with what we've been talking about. But as far as empowering leadership goes, the leader's job is to find the people and to be able to plug them into the right areas. So that's where empowering leadership starts at. You can be a good leader, but you aren't guaranteed to be an empowering leader unless you are using the people to work alongside of you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to being an approachable leader. If people don't feel comfortable with you, they're not going to come to you, and you're not going to necessarily know what gifts they have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the jobs of a pastor, or if it's a larger church, an associate pastor, a small group leader. It's somebody that has direct contact with congregation members. They need to be on the lookout for where can this person best work in ministry.
That sounds good. And if you want to connect with us, you can do so at spreadinglight.com/podcast.
That's correct, and you can download our episodes. We are on iTunes. You can subscribe to us and get these messages delivered every time that we post a new one automatically. And we would encourage you to leave us feedback. You can leave feedback right on our podcast page, or you're welcome to email us at spritepodcast@gmail.com. That's the one that we've set up specifically for this podcast. And if you have any suggestions or feedback, we would love to hear it from you.
I believe that's it then. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.